Now, I'm particularly interested in what Dr. Weaver said about the attitude of the family to children, because we have an absolutely extraordinary attitude in our culture and in various other cultures, high civilizations, to the new member of human society. Instead of saying frankly to children, "How do you do? Welcome to the human race. We are playing a game, and we are playing by the following rules. We want to tell you what the rules are so that you'll know your way around, and when you've understood what rules we're playing by, when you get older, you may be able to invent better ones." But instead of that, we still retain an attitude to the child that he is on probation. He's not really a human being. He's a candidate for humanity. And therefore, to preserve the role of parent or to preserve the role of teacher, you have to do what they do in the Arthur Murray School of Dancing, which is that they string you out. They don't tell you all the story about dancing, because if they tell you, you'll learn in a few weeks and go away. And you'll know it, but instead they want to keep you on. And in just this way, we have a whole system of preparation of the child for life, which always is preparation and never actually gets there. In other words, we have a system of schooling which starts with grades. And we get this little creature into the thing with a kind of, "Come on, kitty, kitty, kitty," and we get it always preparing for something that's going to happen. So you go into nursery school as preparation for kindergarten. You go into kindergarten as preparation for first grade. And then you go up the grades till you get to high school. And then comes a time when maybe if we can get you fascinated enough with this system, you go to college. And then when you go to college, if you're smart, you get into graduate school and stay a perpetual student and go back to be a professor and just go round and round in the system. But in the ordinary way, they don't encourage quite that. They want you after graduate school or after graduation, commencement as it's called, beginning, to get out into the world with a capital W. And so you know, you've been trained for this and now you've arrived. But when you get out into the world at your first sales meeting, they've got the same thing going again, because they want you to make that quota. And if you do make it, they give you a higher quota. And come along about 45 years of age, maybe you're vice president. And suddenly it dawns on you that you've arrived. With a certain sense of having been cheated, because it isn't just the same as life feels the same as it always felt. And you are conditioned to be in desperate need of a future. So the final goal that this culture prepares for us is called retirement, when you will be a senior citizen and you will have the wealth and the leisure to do what you've always wanted, but you will at the same time have impotence, a rotten prostate, and false teeth, and no energy. So the whole thing from beginning to end is a hoax. And furthermore, some other aspects of the hoax, just for kicks. You are involved, by and large, in a very strange business system which divides your day into work and play. Work is something that everybody does, and you get paid to do it because nobody could care less about doing it. In other words, it is so abominable and boring that you can get paid for doing it. And the object of doing this is to make money. And the object of making money is to go home and enjoy the money that you've made. When you've got it, you see, you can buy pleasure. And this is a complete fallacy. Money never can buy pleasure, because all pleasures depend upon not putting down a symbol of power, money, but upon disciplines. In other words, now in Sausalito, where I live, we have pier after pier full of fine boats, motor cruisers, sailing boats, all sorts of things, which nobody ever uses, because they've been bought on the falling for the ad line that if you buy this thing, you will have pleasure, you will have status, you will have something or other. But then they suddenly discover that having a boat requires the art of seamanship, which is difficult but rewarding. Therefore, nobody has time for it, and all they do with the boats is have cocktail parties on them at the weekend. And in myriads of ways, you see, you go home, we're the wealthiest people in the world, and you would think that having earned your money and go home, you would have an orgy and a great banquet and so on, but nobody does. They eat a TV dinner, which is just a warmed-over airline food, and then they spend the evening looking at an electronic reproduction of life, which is divided from you by a glass screen. You can't touch it, you can't smell it, it has no color, except maybe if you're very wealthy it has color. But by and large it doesn't, and you look at this thing, and you have a strange feeling, you see, that the whole procession of grades that was leading to something in the future, to that goody, that gorgeous, voluptuous goody that was lying at the end of the line, it never quite turns up. And this is because from the beginning, we condition our children to a defective sense of identity. And this, I think, is the most important feature in the whole thing, that a child grows into our culture, and as I repeat, this is not only Western culture, it's equally true in Japan, an area of which I can speak with some first-hand knowledge. We condition the child in a way that sets the child a life problem which is insoluble, and therefore attended by constant frustration. And as a result of this problem being insoluble, it is perpetually postponed to the future, so that one is educated to live in the future, and one is not ever educated to live today. Now, I'm not saying that, you know, the philosophy of carpe diem, let us drink today for tomorrow we die, and not make any plans. What I am saying is that making plans for the future is of use only to people who are capable of living completely in the present. Because when you make plans for the future and they mature, if you can't live in the present, you are not able to enjoy the future for which you have planned. Because you will have in you a kind of syndrome whereby happiness consists in promises and not in direct and immediate realizations. So long as you feel that tomorrow it will come. You see, on a dollar bill, it always says promise to pay. It's a promissory note. And nobody ever can come across, because the promise is tomorrow, and as if we say in common speech, tomorrow never comes. But everything is based on the idea, you see, that you will get it tomorrow, and you can enjoy yourself today so long as tomorrow looks bright. But Confucius once said, a man who understands the Tao in the morning can die contentedly in the evening. That is to say, if you have ever lived one complete moment, you can be ready to die. You can say, well, that was it. That was the good. That I've had it. You see? But if you never live that complete moment, death is always a guy who comes into a bar at 2 o'clock in the morning and says, time, gentlemen, please. And you say, oh, please, one more drink. Not yet. Because you haven't really have the feeling that you ever had it, that you ever got there. Now then, the main factor in this kind of conditioning seems to me to be, as I said, the way in which we give children a sense of identity. And in this respect, we do something extraordinarily odd. We define a person. Consider this for a moment, this word person. Harry Emerson Fosdick once wrote a book called How to Be a Real Person. And this, in translation, means how to be a genuine fake. Because the word person means a mask. The persona, the mask worn by actors in Greco-Roman drama, which was a megaphone-mouthed mask, so that through which persona, the sound goes. And so at the beginning of a play script, you will see the dramatis personae, the persons of the drama, that is to say, the list of the masks that the actors are going to wear. But the word has so fallen from its original use that to be a person has come to mean your real identity, your true, sincere, honest self, the person. And we say of someone then, he's a real person. That means he's genuine. But we have confused, you see, the individual organism with the person, with, that is to say, its role. And we have defined the role of the person in such a way that it condemns everybody so defined to perpetual frustration. Now, how is this so? When you are a child, your parents, your peers, your teachers, your uncles and aunts are very anxious to define you. And what they are going to tell you is that you are a free agent. You are responsible. That is to say, you are an independent first cause. You are an origin of actions and thoughts and feelings. And we can praise you or blame you for what you do. And above all, we require of you that you love us. You love your parents, you love your brothers and sisters. As Fred said, a child is not allowed to say, to let that baby sister go back where it came from, because that is not nice. All nice children love their brothers and sisters and their parents. Not, of course, because we tell you to do so, but because you would want to do it yourself. You see now here what's going on. You are required and commanded to do certain things which will be appreciated only if you do them voluntarily. Now, you see, when your identity is defined by society, you cannot resist it. You don't have the knowledge, you don't have the wisdom, you don't have the resources to understand that something's being put over on you. You cannot but help believe the definition of you as a free agent. But you believe yourself to be a free agent as a result of not being free. That is to say, of being hopelessly unable to resist society's identification of you. So in the whole sense of our personality, there is a contradiction. And that is why the sense of ego, of being oneself, is simultaneously a sense of frustration. The feeling of I-ness, so far as most people are concerned, is a feeling of tension between the eyes and behind them. Trigant Barreau, a remarkable man, did some studies about two kinds of awareness, which he called ditension and cotension. Ditentive is the normal kind of awareness that we have, of being a skin-encapsulated ego, of being separate from the environment, and of confronting an external objective world, of which we are the independent observer. And this myth, he said, goes hand in hand with a physical state, which is a state of tension between the eyes. Then he defined cotension as another form of awareness, which you might call a certain kind of openness, in which you realize that the external world is just as much you as anything inside your skin, and that you are not something that comes into this world on probation and doesn't really belong. This is, you see, the attitude that we foster in the child. But that you are something not that comes into the world, but comes out of it. In the same way as a flower comes out of a plant, or a fruit comes out of a tree. That you are an expression. You, as a human being, are a symptom of nature. And that you really belong there, and that, furthermore, your actual self, what is finally and fundamentally you, is not a separate and lonely part of the world, but the real you is the world itself, everything that there is, expressing itself as this particular organism here and now, and of course as you look across the room, as all these other organisms in their here and now. We are all tits on the same sow, if I may put it so crudely. Or if you want to put it more poetically, rays from the same sun. Now, now, children very often ask their parents, you see, as a result of having been given this funny sense of identity, "Mommy, who would I have been if my father had been someone else?" This is a very common child's question, because the child gets the message from the parents using the English language, the French language, the German language, or whatever, that I am somewhat in my body. You gave me my body, but who am I to whom this was given? You see? You can say to a girl in our culture, "Darling, you're absolutely gorgeous. You're so beautiful." And she says, "How like a man. All you think about is bodies. I may be beautiful, but that's my parents gave me my body. But I want to be admired for myself and not for my chassis." And this poor girl is a chauffeur. She's alienated from her body. And she doesn't take any credit, doesn't assume any responsibility for being what she is physically, and this is, of course, as much true of men as of women. It is a common cultural attitude. We say, "I have a body." We don't say, "I am a body." We feel a very sharp distinction, in other words, between our consciousness, which is a kind of focused attention, together with all those actions that we are able to perform voluntarily, on the one hand, and on the other hand, everything both within us and outside us that seems merely to happen to us. Consider for a moment breathing. Do you breathe or are you breathed? You can feel it either way. If you become conscious of breathing, you get the sense that you are doing it in the same way as thinking or walking. But if you forget about it, it goes on, and you don't have to do it at all. That is why breathing exercises are fundamental in all meditation practices in the Orient, because you can understand through breathing and through the experience of breathing that there really is no differentiation between the involuntary experience and the voluntary experience. But when you set up game rules whereby you identify all that you do voluntarily with you and all that happens involuntarily with the other, with what happens to you, and then you put a gulf between these things, not realizing, and this is the secret that is never given away, that self and other are inseparable. Just in the same way that the front and the back of a coin are different but identical. There's all one coin. So in exactly the same way, the experience of self and the experience of other are mutually necessary. You wouldn't know what you meant by self unless you knew other. You wouldn't know other unless you knew what you meant by self. They are therefore polarities, like north and south pole of a magnet. They're inseparable. But that secret doesn't get out because civilized language and thought ignores the fact that all classes, all logical classes, and words are after all labels on classes, are so constructed that they are intellectual boxes, and every box which has an inside also must have an outside. And we think that insides exist apart from outsides, and outsides apart from insides. We don't realize that although they are opposed, they go together. And you see, that is the secret of the whole thing. That is what the child is not let onto. And so instead, the child is defined as a stranger in the earth, and not as a symptom of the earth. And as a result of that, we have the vast, terrifying social problem of alienation, of feeling that the world outside human skins is unfeeling, fully automatic stupidity, which we have to fight and dominate. Otherwise, it will swallow us up and condemn us to the imaginary terrors.
Miss this. Just fabulous.
A little over 6 years ago, I began a series of radio programs over the mother station of KPFK, that is KPFA in Berkeley, which have been running ever since under the general title Way Beyond the West. And I think I may as well take off for listeners in Southern California by a short explanation of that title. It obviously had a double meaning. First of all, geographical, in that the west coast of the United States faces Asia across the Pacific. And in that sense, the Asian world is way beyond the West. The second reason for choosing this title was that the English word way is the nearest translation, perhaps, that we can make to a Chinese word, Tao. You know, that's spelled T-A-O. I don't know why, because it's usually pronounced Tao. And the Tao means many things. Primarily, it means the way of nature, the way things go, the process of the universe. But it also means a way of life, a way of living in accordance with that process. And for example, in Japan, there are many crafts and arts, even sports, which have been influenced by Eastern philosophy, which are called ways in this sense. For example, you all know the word judo. Ju means gentle. Do is the Japanese way of pronouncing Tao, the gentle way. So Japanese also speak of fencing as kendo, the way of the sword. They speak of tea ceremony sometimes as chado, the way of tea. And in Japanese culture there are all sorts of these dos. And they indicate not only simply the technique or mastery of the technique of performing the given art, they also carry the implication that the art involves a way of life. Indeed, in almost the ancient Western medieval sense, every art is a mystery. One used to speak, you see, of the mystery of being a goldsmith, the mystery of being a mason, stonemason, the mystery of being a carpenter. And that strikes us probably as extraordinarily peculiar terminology. But the meaning of it was that every man's vocation in life, what the Indians call one's svadharma, which means approximately one's own function, one's own calling. Every vocation, in other words, is also a way of initiation into the mystery of life, having somewhat a sort of religious function. So that the way is then the Tao, in this title, Way Beyond the West. The way of deeper understanding, or something like that. But why do I say beyond the West, then, in that case? And the reason is that I think that we have not only obviously on the surface here lost the idea that our occupations are vocations. Oh no, not everybody has. But to a very large extent, our idea of an occupation is a way of making money. And we make a very, very destructive division between work and play. We spend 8 hours or whatever it may be at work in order to earn the money to enjoy ourselves in the other 8 hours, and that is a perfectly ridiculous way of living. It's much better to be very poor indeed than to do something so stupid as boring yourself and wasting yourself for 8 hours in order to be able to enjoy yourself the other 8 hours. And the result of this, when you get this fantastic division between work and play, is that work becomes drudgery and play becomes empty. We are speaking of a conception of life, in other words, where work and play should in a way be identical. And it's interesting that Hindus, when they speak of the creation of the universe, don't call it the work of God. They call it the play of God, the Vishnu Lila, Lila meaning play. And they look upon the whole manifestation of all universes as a play, as a sport, as a kind of dance. Lila perhaps being somewhat related to our word lilt. In this superficial sense, then, we have, in the West, tended to lose the idea of our work, our profession, being a way in that sense. And also, furthermore, our religions tend very much to lose sight of what is meant by Tao or way in Chinese, because to a very large extent, Western religion, Christianity, or in what we might call its standard brand forms, does not quite fulfill the function that things like Buddhism and Vedanta, which is the central doctrine of Hinduism, and Taoism fulfill in Asian society. Now, mind you, these ways I'm talking about in Asia are not followed by an enormous number of people, except in a kind of nominal, superficial way. And I'm not trying to make any vast comparisons between Asian society and Western society, and saying that the total Asian way of life is superior to ours. I don't think it is, but I don't think it's necessarily inferior either. It's just different. But the fact remains that there is an aspect of Asian religion and Asian philosophy which is very subdued in Western religion and Western philosophy. So that you might say that a way in Asia, in the sense of the Chinese Tao, is something that does not quite exist in the West in any recognized form. It does exist, yes. It exists unofficially, it exists occasionally, but it's never clearly recognized. So I want to devote this first program to going quite thoroughly into what are these ways, because this program is mainly going to be concerned with discussing the impact upon the West of these profounder aspects of the life and thought of Asia. Now, when we get introduced to some such subject, say, as Buddhism, or Vedanta, or Taoism, or Confucianism, we usually get introduced to it as a form of religion. We may have read books on comparative religion, wherein these phenomena are classed together with Judaism, Christianity, Islam, and so on. And this is really very misleading. It's almost as misleading as if you were to get a textbook on botany, on flowers, and suddenly come across a few chapters on birds. And you would think this was a rather odd classification. Well, if you know anything very much about these forms of Asian spirituality, you get the same kind of a funny shock in seeing them classed in the same type of thing as Christianity or Judaism. This is not to say, you see, that they are superior to Christianity and Judaism. They're different. They have different functions. And when we class them together as all various forms of religion, then a discussion arises as to which is the best religion for everybody, or the best one for you or for me. But I think the difference is much more subtle than that. And I can approach it best by saying that in the West we have primarily three forms of wisdom: religion, philosophy, and science. And a way, a Tao, in the Asian sense, is neither. First of all, it seems to me that a religion, from the Latin root religare, means a rule of life, because religare means to bind oneself to something, to bind, as when we use the word religion in a very, very correct sense. We say of a person who has become a monk or a nun that they have gone into religion, and that means that they have accepted a rule of life involving certain vows of poverty, chastity, and obedience, and other things as well. And the rule of life which constitutes a religion seems to me to consist of three things. A creed, first of all, which is a system of ideas about man and the universe and God, which are revealed ideas, and one believes in these ideas, one puts faith in them. And the great Asian ways that I'm speaking of do not, strictly speaking, have any creeds. They do not involve belief. That is to say, they do not involve committing oneself to certain positive opinions about life. Almost on the contrary, they abandon ideas and opinions, because what they are concerned with is not ideas, not theories, but experience. Experience in the sense almost of sensuous experience, as when they say, you drink water and know for yourself that it is cold. So it is knowledge rather than faith that they are concerned with. Faith I'm using here in the sense of belief rather than the sense of trust, because very often it seems to me that faith and belief could be opposed, in the sense that belief, from the Anglo-Saxon root leaf, which means to wish, is the fervent hope that certain things are true, whereas I rather feel faith is an openness of attitude, a readiness to accept the truth whatever it may turn out to be, a commitment of oneself to life, to the universe, to one's own nature as it is, in the realization that we really have no alternative but to do that. It's like when you get in the water to swim, you have to trust yourself to the water. If you tighten your muscles and cling to the water, you'll sink fast. And next, it seems to me that a religion, besides having a creed, has a code. That is to say, a system of ethical and moral principles which one abides by, because these are revealed as expressing in terms of human conduct the nature and will of the divine. And these Eastern ways do not have a code in that sense. One often speaks of the moral code of Buddhism, but this is a little inexact. What is involved here is not any attempt to make man in accord with the nature of God or the will of God, but rather to suggest certain principles of action which are conducive to the discovery of the experience which lies at the heart and the root of Buddhism. Thirdly, religion seems to me to include a cult, a system of symbols and rites and ceremonials which in a certain way symbolically integrate the worshipper with the Godhead. And although there are rites and forms of not so much worship as thanksgiving in Buddhism and Hinduism, they are not regarded as very essential. They are not essential in the same way, for example, that Catholicism regards the rite of the Mass as essential. So, all in all, it would be difficult to say that Buddhism or Vedanta or Taoism are religions if Christianity or Judaism is what we mean by a religion. I don't want to dogmatize about the meaning of this word. But this is the way I use the word. I use the word religion to mean, in short, a rule of life which has as its function the integration of a community, the binding together of a community. When one becomes a Jew, when one becomes a Christian, what you do essentially is you join a society, you join a community. And in a way you could say the function of a religion is what is called in Sanskrit loka sangraha, that means the upholding of the world, the upholding of the order of the community. By, well, for example, every community must have rules. We must have rules of language in order to be able to communicate with each other. We must agree that we are going to use the word cloud as distinct from yun in Chinese. That's the noise they make when they mean cloud. We say cloud, which is the right noise. It doesn't matter so long as the community in question agrees. And this is what we call a convention. Same way we agree by convention to drive on the right side of the road. So every community needs a system of conventions, and it seems to me that what religion originally provided was, as it were, a divinely sanctioned system of conventions under which the community lives. Now, the function of Buddhism is not so much to create a community. The function of Confucianism is to create a community and to lay down rules and conventions for a community. Parts of Hinduism, what one calls the caste system, the laws of Manu, they are concerned with laying down the rules for a community.